now that I have that running, all right. Hey, looks like I am live. Okay, it worked this time. I'm not. I get so big into isolating myself because I have work to do. And okay, so that's fun. So what I thought I'd do today is just sketch while I talk about the system. Maybe a little less, but I'm not set up with the camera to show you what I'm sketching. So show you where I'm starting from. I got a blank page in my sketchbook. I got a kind of a poorly drawn Carl Jung. I was listening to the, working through the shadow and the actualization questions and this morning, and okay, that's kind of cool. Actually, let me show you some. I got one, a curve on. I want to show you real quick. Isn't that fun? Anyway, so we're going to do a different approach to some sketching, but also I want to think about and talk about stuff. So augmented intelligence is go where I go. Intelligence is awareness and functionality. Most people focus on awareness because that's easier in terms of getting myself organized a little bit. It's a little bit easier to just say, hey, yeah, here's what the model says, or here's what the LLM says, or here's what the tool says. It's harder to go and do things, and part of that's just an interface problem. It's a stakes problem, right? I'm going to go do something, I could get it really, really, really wrong. So this is David Kassan. Let me show you real quick. His video is this one, and he's just talking about plumb lines and perspective. But I'm just going to use his image as the reference. I've just watched the whole thing, and I went back just to get the reference for now. So I think I'm going to do that. So it's, go where I go, augmented intelligence, give me the tools I need to do the thing I need to do. Okay. In order to do that well, there's a few things we work on. So in general, what I want to do is I want to be able to do things, but for me, the validation loop matters more than the thing itself, if that makes sense. It'd be great to go to the moon. It'd be great to reinvent industry. It'd be great to, be there for my kids in ways that, people imagine. And so people imagine robots and tools that are these great big efforts, right? But the gentle efforts done right, small gestures that can begin to create a self-referential clarity, that like, okay, I can kind of begin to see that what I'm doing works, and it didn't take grand efforts. That's probably more valuable. So what we're talking about really is simplicity on the far end of complexity, right? Let it be what it is, and I'll do my best around that. But allow me to see in the stage I'm in whether that's making sense. Now, I think because the camera's running, I'm erasing more than I normally do. I feel like I'm a little bit on the spot. I put myself on the spot. So I'll show you my block in real quick. Can't see that very well. But just kind of just a general, that's where I want that image to sit, right? So the small incremental steps I take that can validate, that tends to be may be more useful. I'm drawing a plumb line here. I like this process of building a like a shadow version. I just kind of go over it and over it, and then I draw the line. It kind of shows me where am I going. So now I'm doing what's called anchoring, which is when I put an anchor down, that becomes the ground truth. So I'm just going to shade in where the eyes go and put a ground truth there. And what that means is I'll move everything else around the anchor. And I'll triangulate from the anchor. So the eyes becoming the central anchor. The other proportions could matter differently. So just looking at negative space here with my plumb line to get that profile kind of right. And so the anchor becoming a ground truth, and then I work around, and I triangulate from that space. Okay, so now I gotta check proportions here. And I'm gonna go there. So got the eyes, the length of the nose. I got the eyes, and then the length of the nose. So they call it. You get the Z. Who was it? Is that Rembrandt? I don't remember who does it. But there's a Z. He talked about it in this video. But you get it with the brow, the nose, under the nose. And so I work on that. Those angles, those proportions, I triangulate. And that's what that's doing for me. That's giving me feedback. It's kind of hard to see otherwise. See, and I've got a very big mistake on the shoulders. It's easy to fix right now. It's off by about a third of my measurement for his left shoulder on my right. And like it's really easy once I start triangulating and looking, instead of just like, okay, that's about there. So another way to say that is I can lose context. I can lose my reference and not notice. That's really common with a brain like mine. Even though I can get it right 9 times out of 10, I don't always notice the 1 time out of 10. And so having validation or feedback means that I can begin to just make adjustments at an appropriate time. Also do some measurement around the eye. I'm going to get this sideburn in with a measurement. So now I've got a measurement with the eye. Okay, about that. So getting feedback. So what we call that in software development is unit tests. And oh, by the way, that's what I kind of prefer. Is I prefer to work on tools. I prefer to build software with my AI because, or with my intelligence systems, it's probably a little bit more honest what's going on. Because the validation is very clear and easy, and the tooling is already there. And do some horizontal plumb lines here as well around the brow. See, I got that one wrong. Got that proportion is wrong. So just by working at this level, the validations tell me where am I really at. And if that's about right, I could do that in software a little bit easier. Give him his whole head. Then I can do it in something, nuanced or, difficult that way. But yeah, I think maybe what happened, I'm just looking at the triangulation. So I go around and around, and I start to notice, not as a master artist who's proving that I'm the great artist, but as a person willing to listen to feedback, to actually put myself in a place where I can get feedback, use that and push that into the system, and then know how contextually that does or doesn't work. I feel like that is a power move. So now I'm coming back and restructuring around the anchors because I was confused by localized information. So I had this localized information or stubborn memory. So imagine you're an LLM and you're giving me coding advice and your memories get off track. Nobody's ever experienced that, right? And pretty soon you're doing the wrong thing consistently. You just are. And when you try to bring that LLM back into the moment, what it does is it doesn't know how to unravel its mistaken path memory choices, back to something. So it needs some structure to get back to it. Now, I think that if I ask the system how how to work with it, like have it teach me better prompts, how to teach me better step sizes, how to teach, get me where I want to go. Building some sort of an X. We got the Z on from the brow and the nose. So if I can do it this way, so it'd be this Z, this one, and then over here that creates a Z. So that's what I'm drawing over here. And then there's an X that goes from this part of the eye down to the edge of the nostril, right? And then I exit from the actual corner of my mouth back to, I can't seem to go in reverse here. It goes back that way. So I've got this one here and I've got this one there. It's like this reverse thing and then trying to think about. So, but what's obvious when I draw that X is it starts to give me a feedback of whether or not those proportions, those angles, are the same on my reference as they are on my picture. And then I can do a plumb line down from the corner of the mouth to the part of the eye that it's underneath. Like, okay, so it should be there, and then I can look at the distance between where I'm sticking the mouth and and the bottom of the nose. So it's just like a unit test on my drawing, right? So augmented intelligence says I need to have a frame or a structure to augment, right? I need to know kind of the reference of the subject, of what they are trying to do, how they know it's correct, what the validation is, what their stakes are. If they've got, if this is a mission critical system that has to work, I need to know that versus, okay, this would be a nice to have. I'm kind of goof around at the beach while the kids are in the ocean, and I just want to see what this can do versus I bet my company on this one bet. Now I don't think that's a good idea to do, says the guy that did it. But learning how to understand how to work with risk means means that the way that I loop back and fix what I did and build new structures. And for me, I think there's a lot of tools we can use, but if I think about, like, there's a hard, concrete, um, durable um, system that's maybe tied to first principles or validatable things in the real world, something, say, an engineer would agree with, or somebody that was there would agree with. And then we have maybe the probabilistic gestural systems. So probabilistic and deterministic systems being the one way to triangulate reality. We say, okay, instead of just saying, I did a thing, okay, I did a thing, and the deterministic feedback shows me this gap, and the probabilistic feedback shows me this gap. So then I can go around and around and say, okay, well, I did a thing, work, and the systems that support it have other views of the same thing, okay? And so if that's how we go forward in the system, what we end up creating, just going to look at these proportions here. What we end up creating, see, that's just not right. I have to push the ear back. What we end up doing, just a little bit, is we build a confidence in what's working. And then we feel like, or we know that what we've done begins to look like a result that we can count on. And if that's true, I'm just going to block in that mouth, then we'll know it. And if it's not true, we also know that. Give his little man bun here a space to live. Okay, rough block in is there. Making adjustments here. So it's just, how do I know before I go? How do I trust? How persnickety do I need to be around these questions? What are my stakes? So I use software development as the ultimate feedback loop, because this is where, if it worked, the system shows me that it worked. Anybody can use the system can show me it worked. Anybody that has a better idea can show me how it didn't work. People use the system, a little ennui in my head about being able to visualize the collar around the neck. So instead of it being an abstract triangle or a square, it's a wrap around the neck. His idea of an art school is you put the model or the subject in one room and you put the artist in another room. And the reason for that is you're developing a spatial awareness and a visual memory, which begins to develop a sensory advantage. We can actually build up a clarity around, just going to block in some of what I see. And then I'll show you my mistakes and I'll show you my strengths. So it's feedback is all it is. Okay, so this guy looks a lot dumpier than his actual subject, which is fun because I've got the man bun there. So it almost seems like I stuck a man bun on a CEO or some executive suite, person. Like, what is that doing there? Let me show you how silly this is right now. So, yeah, I got some of the proportions wrong. Um, he's got a more elongated face, and he's got, um, whatever. And so he looks like he came out for me more like a CEO's executive type. But look at that man bun. It's like, what is that doing there? It doesn't even belong. I don't know if that's fixable, while you work today, but so all models are wrong. Some models are useful. That's the Deming thing, right? It's teaching me some things. Um, anyway, so I'm going to switch to some form, just rough construction on form. I'm going to bring back his hair to re-elongate his face a little bit. And then I'm going to see if I can analyze and see where I went wrong here. So that's the job. And so the work piece I'm doing, okay, so lately what have I been working on? I've been working on tools around communication inside of, I've been building an incubator. What the incubator is for is to actually just build software. I need a system that can reflect on itself of whether or not it's fulfilling the work I give it and whether or not the feedback mechanisms I give it are reliable enough to adjust. And then if that's kind of generally right, we've modeled a reality, then it can come in and deal with, at that point, we can come in and deal with things like um, reinforcement learning and various bandits, various dynamic programming tools for constraint programming to figure out priorities, to learn or reinforce structures. We've got basically a workspace where um, what I say goes, but does what I say build something useful? Is this a predictable um, outcome, or is this kind of more of a I got lucky sometimes? And the reality of that is it's a mixed bag, right? I think that the part of the stodginess is that the abstractions I used removed the expression in his face. So even though I'm just doing a rough block in and creating structure I can build with, um, I can come back and by looking at the negative space between plumb lines and restoring kind of the dynamic version of that line gives him concern in his brow, gives him that tilt in his head, that stop and reflect, it's my private time. It's coming back into the drawing a little bit. Not perfectly. I think I noticed it late. So by noticing it at that stage, either I'm brave and redo it, or I stay to my gun. I stick to my guns, right? I stick to my original mission, which was to talk about how feedback loops in AI and an augmented environment can work. And it's the same as drawing. It's the same as a good conversation. I'm not very good at conversation anymore. I used to be, I think, okay, but maybe old friends would deny that. But the idea that I was listening, not to respond, but I was listening to participate in a discovery with somebody about what they know, how they think, what they have to offer, what they disagree with, where we go from here, how to take account of my role in our relationship. That's a better conversation. That's what the tool should do. So what's the feedback loop with software, augmented software build? That feedback loop is, I like using these. I mean, it kind of drives me into a mechanical, and as a mechanical pencil, right? I mean, I have other favorite pencils I actually been drawing with more lately, but because the lead in here is so soft, I can build volume with my finger and have a different kind of relationship to the work. And actually, I just like learning. I like learning. Even if I got this wrong, I like what's available for me to learn in this moment. So I just slowly build up using hashes and volume, value. I add a value. So I generally push into a 5-value structure. But for my mind and practice, it's very easy for me to lose track which target value am I really pushing. So if I go after the deepest, darkest shadow and block in that value, and then I can go highlights. What are the highest highlights? And then what's the half tone between those two places? And I fill in that, so it gives me a 3-value system, and then I can do one more gradient between the two, and that gives me a pretty good looking block in for value. So it's just mechanical at that point. It just says, okay, that's what I can see at that level. And then if that's working more or less, if that's expressing the subject in a way where I have a relationship with the subject, what I end up with is a way to pivot and triangulate from like, oh, there's a mistake. Oh, there's a proportion problem here. There's a value problem there. There's an expression problem here. There's a line problem there. So it basically is a way to reflect back to me what my brain is up to when I go on automatic. And I might be being very generous, saying that 9 times out of 10 I notice when I go off. What if it was 1 time out of 10 I notice when I go off? I mean, my brain's doing a lot of things. And as I understand it, I've been called out on this because who knows what's really going on in the brain. It really annoys people when we're overconfident of what's going on in the brain. But the model of the brain, being able to say, look, if we had the computational power to represent the world in some sort of a probabilistic model, say a Bayesian model, what could we reflect back all of the activity of the brain? And one argument is we don't even know what's going on in the brain. It's a complex system, and therefore there's emergent behavior, therefore there's unobservable, therefore the act of seeking to observe the the mind, the brain, consciousness, thought, clarity, memory tends to mess with it. So, for example, any memory I bring back, it comes back and it comes to me from various ways. If I have sensory inputs, or if I have, if it's related in a, what part of the brain can I recall it from? And usually it's more than one. And if that's true, what when I remember things, it gets mixed in with the current memory of what's going on, kind of restores it or reinforces the memory in a way that might not be consistent with the original, right? That's just the way, one feature of the brain. And so when we say, hey, my mind lapses, oh, and then the efficiency of memory is like, well, it tends to be the very similar thoughts or ideas or experiences that that are unremarkable in their own way, don't really hold their own for there's no emotional, sensory, extra thing to attach it to. It tends to just blend into an average. So older people, retired people who kind of have the same day every day, their memory fades partly because, yeah, there's plasticity differences and whatnot, but there's also questions of, notice I'm using the eraser a lot less. I've eased into the work. I was afraid, even though I was afraid of making a mistake. So the plasticity problem is, oh yeah, the brain isn't forming itself as aggressively as we get older. But also, the brain is smart enough to be efficient. So if it's the same thing every day, what that ends up being is just a shared memory that everything just kind of, oh yeah, that's the typical day. You get up, you do these things. And so what we do is we create remarkable experiences. We actually make something remarkable, meaning it's actually different than just every other thing, and then it gets its own space in the brain. And then when I recall it, I can recall it more precisely. When I go on automatic, it's basically, oh, the activity I'm doing is like any other one. My brain doesn't want to just work really hard. I think this is the way I imagine it. My brain doesn't want to work really hard on things it already knows how to do. So it gets bored really easily with the humdrum. And if that's true, if that's a way to understand what's actually happening, whatever's actually happening might not be that close to what I'm saying. But if that's kind of a useful model of why the brain checks out, when it has work to do, then when I miss things, I get proportions wrong, or I don't follow up, or I forget things, or whatever. Whenever my brain is struggling with the tasks I give it, but I don't notice right away, because the brain is basically like, no, you got this. Don't, I'm not even paying attention. When I was young, when I got my undergraduate degree, paying attention became a very visceral, real choice. Okay, I'm here now. And then I'm putting into this space these inputs, these thoughts. And I am actively choosing frame of mind. I'm actively building on old thoughts. I'm actively questioning and engaging, what's possible for me, or what's really going on for me. And that felt a lot easier. It's really interesting as the drawing takes on more and more shape, I can see more and more of the mistakes. Yeah, a better practice might be to spend time building a foundation I can build on. So as a younger mind, I would build a foundation. I would develop a mindset that was an active choice, and then I would come back and review and replenish, challenge, create, restructure, whatever's going on. And not so much anymore. It's not as common for me to work that way. And I think I just take it for granted, the amount of work that I really can't put into, life, into thinking, into my mental life. But so when I miss something, I notice it down the road, as with drawing, so with digital systems, right? This is a metaphor. If you didn't pick up on that, it's kind of a walking metaphor, meaning I don't really quite know where it's going, but I can see that it's got consistency with what I would like to improve. So to be a great artist is to be a great observer. To observe as an artist means I observe not just the physicality, the line, proportion, the perspective, the volume, the value, the building blocks of a piece, but also the relationship I have with it, the emotions I feel when I connect to a subject, putting those somewhere, giving them something to do, letting that be part of the conversation that I'm having with the subject, building a subject's capacity to do some lifting for me. Creativity is meaning making. And so if I'm willing to give my creation a meaning, even if it's private to me, make up stories of what's going on in this person's life, how he sees himself, the similarity and differences we have. That gives an observation, feedback available to me to improve a work if I'm willing to do that, when I'm willing to do that. And then I have my lapses. So it goes in cycles. It also goes in strange loops. And I can simplify that. So let's say that I'm dealing with an art piece, and it's kind of drawing my eye away from what I care about. Like this ear is getting a lot of attention. What I do instead of continuing to build detail in this intricate ear is I can just ask myself where I want the eye to start. So I can observe what's my experience of the ear. It's like, oh, it's pretty cool. What's my experience of the picture? It's like, oh, it's not necessarily a strong picture. So what is a strong picture? I bet an artist could tell me more about what a strong picture looks like. But I would say a strong image, let's call it a strong image. I think that's a more accurate term. Let's say a strong image has the power to connect, convey information to the audience. Maybe what I intended, maybe what I discovered while I built it, maybe. I'm going to go ahead and give this guy a background. So I'll just imagine a simple background. And so a strong image is going to have elements in it that cohere together, that are doing complementary things, right? They're not going to necessarily be the same. They might contradict one another, but the experience of looking at the image becomes, or experiencing the image becomes a it becomes an act of connection. And these acts of connection ground us in our shared reality. And we know when something is fundamentally wrong, even if we can't put our finger on exactly, well, what's going on here. But we can say whether or not that is consistent with anything we can do. So I can see so many mistakes in what I did. But the purpose of this image is not to become a camera, and it's not to justify my mistakes either. But because I've come this far with this much, I can continue to expose myself to the observation of this subject and what would happen here. And one of the things I'll be honest about, I'm conflicted because world events are what they are right now, because what I do has something to do with that in terms of, if successful, there's probably options available to people I care about, meaning anybody that's not a predator. And that ability to work together on things we care about, to teach each other, to delegate to one another what it is we're doing, to work around the realities of our life. That's where I get excited. But my fear, and this is unfounded, and this has to do with my isolation, my fear is that some people are wolves in wolves' clothing. They don't even hide it. They don't hide that they have no problem, munching through somebody's well-being, their security foundation, absolutely shattering things they have legal right to, things that are any decent human being would offer another human being. They have no problem taking that because they're playing a zero-sum game with our resources. So that struggle I have with where the world goes in terms of fear and garbage, that really motivates me to work. I work about 2 to 20 hours a day. The average is probably, in the double digits always. And unless I'm really in breakdown mode. But the choices I make to build what I build and the ways that I build it, the concerns that I have, they're bleeding into this picture. And so augmented intelligence really is about finding a way to meet me where I am weak, to meet me where I can't go any further, to add capacity where I'm lacking. So to put that another way, let's say that there was a carefully built system that could communicate to my child emergency information that they need. And I could trust my life with that system. Let's just say I trust my life with that system for reasons, because I did the work. That capacity to do something like that, basically it'll communicate, this is what you need to know. It'll confirm that I got there. If it didn't do that, it'll escalate, it'll find another way. It'll escalate, it'll find another way. If it's smoke signals, it's going to start burning down the woods, and build smoke signals. Hey, hey Stella, look, you need to know something. So it'll keep going until successful and confirmed to be successful, even if expensive. This is an imaginary system. And so if I have a relationship with such a system, if such a system existed in my space, if I built such a system, then even when I'm busy, even when I'm on a different part of the world, even when things that I normally could do, like just pick up the phone and, hey, Stella, are you okay? Here's some information you need to know. Okay, done and done. So when that breaks down, this other can fill in the gaps, right? So that's the delegation I can do to something trusted. And let's just say I have on the order of 100 of those tools that I can absolutely have confidence of what they're for, what they will work for, what they won't work for. And I'm just clear that that's what happens. It's kind of what you see on Star Trek, right? They know their tools. That's their superpower. Yeah, they break it, they do whatever. That's not always consistent with what people need or expect or normal use of what something was designed for. But not a big deal if they know what they're doing and they get the results they're after. That's a power play, and that's fun watching. It's fun to watch somebody competent work. And so that's what that could be. But that's good, and I want that. But more interesting is to watch people I absolutely respect work and parrot them, mimic them, do a thing like they do it. If they wrote a book, use the Autocorrect method and take notes. Just take some smart notes around what are they saying and how do I relate to it. The Autocorrect method just means I read with a pen and I write down notes in my own words. I'm very careful if there's ever a quote that I need that it's quoted. And then I cite my sources and I index it so I can find it. That's it. That's the method. And if I've got that method down, it turns out Autocorrect was a very effective researcher. And it turns out that having that approach is a pretty cool way to research. He was able to be incredibly prolific um, because of that. I don't remember the German for Sattelkasten. The Kasten is box, and I think it's just put index cards in a box is how he did it. So however you wanted to, represent things you're learning, you could just read a book, somebody you really respect, take notes, and then if you, say, had the incubator like I'm building right now or had access to it, you could just say, oh, let's incubate up. Let's just build a quick and dirty version of how to do what they're teaching me to do. Let's say it's LLMs in production, Crispy's book. And they say, okay, cool. Here's what he's teaching. Here's the methods. Here's how he builds his data engineering. Here's everything. And so we can run those in production, and we can learn by building something simple, but it's an incubated application. It has services, it has communication between the services and the different roles that involve themselves with that system, and what are the metrics and service levels, what are the guarantees that we have, where are the risks in the system, what external systems are we relying on that we don't build ourselves, and which ones do we need to maintain internally. What does the data contract look like for this? How does this reflect a reality that we're building? How, when we actually use it, what are we learning? And then how do we know if we were to, take another step and build production quality code based on the smart notes, the Zattelkasten method, and the incubated application that's a running system, an actually working system. How do we reflect? I'll show you progress and mistakes real quick, so you can see what's going. How do we do that? So if we can more or less, express a truth that's in reflection to, say, Crispy's work, what I end up doing is, so this is progress so far. This is what I've ended up drawing so far. And there's a lot of mistakes in it. The neck is way too short. His left eye on the right here is too big. The ear is all squampas and it draws all the attention. So the high contrast of the lights and darks are all in the ear, but the emotion is in the eye. So pushing the eye a little bit harder, further would work. The nose is a little unshaped and structural, and there are pieces that are rough and loose. Okay. But some of this is process. It'll naturally get better as I work on it. Some of this is foundational. It won't work unless I really restructure the image. I'm not planning on restructuring anything. So that gives me, an experience of myself, whether or not I like how I work, whether or not it's effective for the thing, for what I'm doing. So building up an opinion, and then testing that opinion, and then figuring out where to go from the feedback. That's just the natural way of learning, right? It's one way to learn. But we delegate. So let's say I build up Crispy's system and I delegate to Chris. Basically, he knows more. about LLMs than I'll ever know. And he studied it. He's an associate professor. I met him because he was the technical reviewer from a VC that gave us a term sheet. So we got a term sheet from a. Oh no, his company didn't give us the term sheets. A different group gave us the term sheet. But I met him during that VC process, and then I met him later on other things. Then he wrote this book, and it's just it's a hallmark of I would rather delegate these decisions to Chris than to try to go reinvent that knowledge on my own or to try to pretend that I am the expert where clearly I'm not. And so I mean, this is the guy that, in his words, was putting LLMs on Raspberry Pi before it was cool. People give him a little bit of a hard time for that. Like they don't see the value of distributed AI yet. People that don't realize that a CPU and distributed AI has more to say because it is contextually relevant. People will learn. I rebuilt my whole system when I realized I was building it the way everybody else was building it. If you have a 6-figure budget, you could use the early systems I built. But now if you have a $10 budget, you can use the systems I'm building. It's like, well, what kind of a problem can I solve if I work with 6-figure budgets versus what are the kinds of problems I can solve if I'm working on 2-figure budgets. 1-figure budget isn't $10. Yeah, sure, spend 6 figures on me, but I'll take it. At some point, it's just a value calculation. But if you think about it from a systems perspective, if I can only work on the kinds of problems that the most privileged amongst us care about, good chance I'll miss things that the rest of us care about. Right? That's just the nature of reality. Can't pretend that that all opinions weigh the same or should weigh the same, or anybody with a thought or an idea or wants to build something has as much to offer as maybe the people with real stakes. Let's say it's your house that gets flooded, or let's say it's your well that goes dry. Let's say it's your well that gets poisoned is more likely, or let's say it's your groceries you can't afford, or your house you can't insure, or let's say it's your daughter that gets doxxed, or your car that breaks down. What are the things that get fixed? With an augmented intelligence, we can build systems that follow somebody doing real work and figure out what they need and go up from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a value mask over that ear to hide its distinctions. And then when I come back and do some highlights, I will bleed out more of these. I will basically drown out the distractions in this image. I want a strong image, right? So it has what's called a verisimilitude. Meaning it's not perfect, but it has an emotional balance. It has a cadence to it, a rhythm to it, a frequency of how you experience something. You can see he's concerned. he's actually concerned about world events when this picture was taken, but um, and then he said in that video I shared with you, or I should probably put it in the comments, he's worried about what just happened on October 7th. And I am worried about that, but I'm also worried about all of the things that are going on. Not just, it's like we can't keep doing it the way we've always done it, expect different results. We can't pretend the truth is not the truth any longer. And it's that denial because we're uncomfortable, or the struggle we have, that we try to propagandize our friends. We try to pretend that the important thing here is that I'm right. Or that's probably the least important part of any of these kinds of problems. Who's right? It's more important of what works, right? What are we going to do about it? How do we communicate? Who do we trust? Are we willing to adjust things that are broken in our society, in our communications, in our relationships? Where do we go from here? Can I make an account of how I got this far? How I got into this situation? Is there something I'm learning about myself? Can I stand in that Jungian moment after emerging from the shadows and the world looks different? I feel calmer and slower, but not externally slower, just I do my life differently because I'm no longer doing life for other people's approval, but rather for something I can build or contribute or add or know, serve. What do I need to do in a world full of so much pain, including my own pain, plenty of pain in my world that I've created or experienced, for sure. So whenever I, blur it out like that, what I'm doing is I'm creating a simpler plane, taking detail that I thought was important, and then on feedback it says, oh yeah, that's drawing the eye the wrong way. It's engaging me the wrong way. I can reflect on and have confidence around what I would do better. And then I just look at the reality. Like, for example, there's right here, it's graphite, right? The spittle for me talking about all these things right there, right in the middle of his sideburn. I'm like, oh, dang, you know. But interesting, this artist, he's, I think, a cowboy. He draws cowboys, and apparently he wears a cowboy hat sometimes. And, or at least a hat, spent some time in the sun. So he's kind of got that classic farmer look to his suntan, the way his suntan works. And so I'm observing that, but it's not so much about being scientifically correct in how his daily habits are. Maybe it's all plein air stuff. Maybe he just likes to draw in the sun. It has nothing to do with horses or farms or other kind of work that he might do. But I do know he draws cowboys and paints cowboys. And so that could be, part reflection of what he's up to. So having question, having concern, having comment, having a relationship. Anyway, to get real quick, because I'm kind of going about as far as I want to go on this little sketch, just talk a little bit more about the system I'm building. So what I said is, hey, feedback matters. And so build software, and if the software is validatably correct, then I've done something I trust, right? I'm building up a system that I like. And if people use it, spend their time, money, reputation, supporting it, then I've confirmed outside of my own imagination that there's something real there. And if that's happening, just gonna see that the artistic intent kind of lost its structure a little bit in places. Then whatever mistakes exist in the system, they're easier to fix because now we've got real guidelines. We can snap back into something real. Like, well, this system matters because it communicates to somebody in an emergency what they need to know. Or this system matters because they can trust the result that we calculated. Or this system matters because it's cheap. Or the system matters because it's up and running versus a theoretical one in documentation. You know, so why does it matter to me? So what I do is I build these value trees, and I look at the predicted, the actual, and the budgeted, and I compare those gaps. So I look at, okay, what does that teach me when I thought it would take this and it took that? When I thought it would produce this and it produced that? What is that teaching me about the way I think? When did I go blank in my thinking? So having a system that can do anything, or a system that can observe how to build software and measure anything, and then later on we figure out, well, what measures matter for this environment, right? But then also, when we work with other people and build the relationships with other people, what we can do is we can collaborate on a project and have different reasons for collaborating. Their project might be my underwriting for my project. You know, I might be building a very different project, but they're the domain experts, but they have different values than me. So we might decide to collaborate and teach each other and delegate to the expert in the room create a room where there can be an expert or experts, and use the differences in opinions and results and perspectives and delegate to that. But then, so, you know, and then in a system that says, well, look, because I have system level, service levels of everything that I want to measure, and I have actual results, and I have the predicted, allowed, budgeted, you know, those things teach me a lot. But they also, I get specific types of validation, specific types of data transforms, specific types of models come out of this. We build some deterministic models, some probabilistic models. We spend more time where it gives us the greatest lift. What we end up doing, to generalize everything I just said, is that's just capacity. So what capacity is, generically, is it's what can I do in reality? But if I'm delegating to a person, say I'm delegating to a junior programmer, say I'm delegating to a child, say I'm delegating to a parent, say I'm delegating to a business partner or to an executive, their perspective can come back, and in a facilitated conversation, the differences become part of the structure in an augmented intelligence environment. So I end up with, I think, the richest lab possible by building software first and systems beyond that, and then other feedback, and then models last. They're the most expensive thing to build, the hardest thing to validate. Why don't I create a world in which validating that model is easy and simple? And now those models, those probabilistic models, those LLMs, the feedback tools, the simulated memories, all the things that need to occur, those start to build up. Okay, so here's the picture I ended up with. And I'm going to switch back. So, okay, strengths. I feel like I caught an emotion. Maybe I put my emotion into it. And I also simplified some of what was going on there. But his face has volume. Maybe I gave him 10 pounds or 20 pounds. But, there you go. And then let me switch to and major problems like the neck. I took like 2 inches off of his neck. But yeah, let me show you. That's the reference there. So I'll stick the his YouTube. This is David Kassan, and it seems like he does a great job. And I really enjoyed this as for proportion, but it seemed to be a good way to think about building technology and how far we go with stuff. So anyway, ciao for now, I guess. But that's what I'm working on. So now at this point, I'll go wash my hands, and I've got to get the call plans cleaned up, and I'm refactoring some of the integration of the worker with its processor cloud environment. How do I run different tools? And this is just incubator tools, but it basically can mock out anything we build out in production. So by building it quick and dirty in the incubator, learning everything I can, and using that in the production push, or iterating from there into more and more useful tools, and then keeping all along all the conversation, all the feedback, all the service levels, all the choices, really building that out, learning the gateway interfaces, using other tools, discovering what's already out there, getting smarter with what exists. That's what I'll work on this afternoon. Um, until I can't, I guess. That's how I go. I'll put in 5, 8 hours on that. I've already put in 3, 4 hours of that this morning, and redesigned the things in, I think, a good, clear way. The call plan was just kind of a ball of mud. And so getting feedback from building systems is a cool way to think about the world. And I've always been that kind of a thinker, like, yeah, I'll go to an amusement park and I see patterns and I start building, income sheets and balance sheets in my head, count how many people are in the park and think about rainy days, think about maintenance, think about carny experience versus, or carnival experience versus, an established amusement park that's there for generations, and its maintenance, trying to estimate the profit structure, and then thinking about the financial structure behind the amusement park, and which kinds of structures would have been smarter to do. There's one in Utah that's family owned, lagoons, family owned. And like, okay, I don't know what their financial structure is, but I can imagine it. Versus Disney and how they do theirs versus other ones. Those attached to casinos, and how they grow or don't grow, and how those systems work. And it's the same thing with startups and startup culture. Based on the funding, we build very different things, and based on last man standing, last person standing, we tell a very different story. And based on the models du jour of which decade did we build that company in, they end up looking very different. And I don't know how many companies I've been in. I'm usually the first guy at a lot of startups, and some of them are pretty popular. I've told people this not because I'm the final word. I actually couldn't do anything without everybody around me, and most of the intelligence got added after I left. But going through that hard, impossible dreaming moment, working the 20-hour days, 7 days a week, figuring out how to build a thing, and then doing hard trade-offs in that pressure cooker environment, and then trying to figure out how to communicate when my mind is on tilt, and then still going forward and making it make sense, having mandatory hacky sack every afternoon, losing my mind, and totally botching an OSCON conference talk, and then an hour later getting fired by the people that I had been working around the clock for. I stretched myself way too thin and had all kinds of problems. And then they basically are like, yeah, you're fired. I'm like, okay. So that ended up being a hard day of my life. That was a lot of years ago. So, but what do I learn from those experiences, and how do I build? And it turns out that I think that that's one of the richest places to learn about motivation, about intelligence, about trade-offs, about relationships, about, did I say that already? About finance, about sales and pre-sales and go-to-market strategies, and things that don't belong in marketplaces, and things that are not transactional, things that are better than transactional, and how we learn. And like that's the seed bed. 30 years of that gives me a seed bed to think about intelligence differently. I think in a sustainable way, and to accept partnerships with people on a basis that are more sustainable to the whole, to what I can see. And it also makes me incredibly paranoid and tired and irate and opinionated. So we're talking about work, we're talking about intelligence, we're talking about augmented systems, and so if you've heard me talk about things I've built, it is a reputational play. I know I'm claiming that something should exist because it does exist, or that I matter because they're successful. But it also means that I've learned things when I was in the room, or when I was sleeping in the cot in the office, or when you know, I had two laptops go out, so I had to drag my big old iMac into the office and just plant it in the office, and then bring a cot and sleep in the office because I couldn't get work done at home, you know, and they weren't paying me enough to buy a new laptop, and they weren't buying me a new laptop. It's ridiculous. Yeah, people that made fun of me there, they really were mean about that. Like, yeah, but think about the whole bigger system. Think about the awareness functionality that I gained from that experience. Anyway, lots of good wins, but lots of good losses. And I think they're getting baked into the system. I think they really are. I think that we're building, I think we are building something interesting here. Um, and we'll see. Hey, if you've listened to this, thanks for hanging with me. And figure out better formats for talking and sharing. And I keep delaying demos because I have so much going on. Yeah, it's just trade-offs. But once I have, I do want to say this. I just want to tell you one more thing. It's a theme for me. So you figure out what work you want to do, right? And work is a flywheel. It's an automation flywheel. So what we say is, look, not everything should be automated, but some things can be. If I can rely on 100 tools and they do things for me, and I know exactly how they work, not that they're the best, but that they are the ones I need, and then I build other ones I need or rely on ones I can find that are better, and I delegate to my friends and people I trust, hand them work that I can't do or they can do better. And we build a relationship on that, where I contribute to them, they contribute to me, and we find a way, pay them for their services, or give them the platform they need to succeed, or give them my time because they're giving me their time, or whatever that looks like. Pay them. uh, so we do this delegation thing. We go through the automation flywheel, meaning we go through the breakdown. We prioritize. We start automating. We get feedback. We go around and around and around. So we notice that our capacity is growing, but our inputs to outputs, that ratio is really changing, where the outputs are becoming much bigger. And we're also, when we do it, we say, hey, yeah, we're also predicting and budgeting and storing, figuring out what's actually going on. So I can say, look, I want to do this because in the next 10 iterations, it's going to reduce my cost by a lot. And so I don't get any cash from it, but I get time from it. Or I want to release these tools this way because it builds my reputation, which might get me access to contracts for people, or software developers, or better ideas, or papers that I haven't read, or books I haven't read. So it exposes me to things I don't have. So I start budgeting and prioritizing what I work on because I've structured it in this environment. So we talk about augmented intelligence, like, well, it doesn't have to always be that snazzy. Let me go bigger, because I'm kind of trying to drive a point at the end of this conversation. It doesn't have to be the big snazzy thing. It could just be, and I would rather it be big and snazzy. Remarkable is the Seth Godin way to think about it. But building a practice up around what is done, what is delivered, what is used, what is real, whether or not I feel like it, whether or not it's convenient. Just how do I count on this to work? How do I build the teams around me? How do I build up anybody I work with? You know, automation does not replace people. It collaborates with people. This is augmented intelligence. We give people what they need. I work with people in ways they need. They work with me in ways that I need. It's just a different mindset. And the problem is the people that are so accustomed to transactional thinking, to zero-sum thinking, they tend to come out of conversations around these tools with exactly the wrong idea. It's like they don't realize that they're blind because they've put the wrong blinders on over and over and over again. They've been competitive in a way that will not allow them to succeed in the changed world. And then when the parting comment is, well, I've got all the money I need. And I'm like, yeah, I put all my fortune into this because I could see where we're going. And I'd rather have a voice in where we're going than where we've been. I'm not dead yet. So building something that works in collaboration, that's valuable to me. And building people up around me and giving them the tools they need to succeed and ensuring that who they are and what they're doing here works by their standards, not by mine. But we start with building software because it's a great feedback loop. And then whatever other tools and systems we need, sure. Whatever models we need, sure. Anyway, that's repetition. But anyway, I like this picture. I think that talking to you guys was a good idea for my drawing. Even if nobody ever listens to this, I like this drawing. Okay, talk to you when I do.